At this stage in the cycle, there's two camps. You've got your altcoin degens, Bitcoin maxis. They're always fighting each other. But you are smarter than that. You understand that this game is about making money. You don't want to get married to your altcoin. You want to hit it and quit it. Move on to the next thing, the next crypto that is going to pump. And if you do have some Bitcoin, maybe you want to start selling off some of that Bitcoin for those juicy altcoin 32x gains. Let's have a look at that in today's video, looking specifically at those altcoin charts and how that all plays out in this next stage of the cycle. We've got Bitcoin to get through, we've got Ethereum to get through, plenty of altcoins as well, plus a look at the macro cycle that just keeps on macroing to the upside. Like and subscribe as soon as you get here. Save yourself the hassle. Link at the top of the video descriptions for our free crypto economic report. Click that link, name and email. You'll get the next report that comes out on Tuesday evening. Let's kick it off with this particular chart. We looked at this 3 months ago as the cycle continued on, moving from that Bitcoin phase to that Bitcoin altcoin phase. So this is the phase that we're looking like we're in, this green stage. As we've looked back on previous cycles, typically from here, Bitcoin has a charge, but then it's basically rotation into altcoins. That shouldn't come as a surprise now, but when we're looking back 6 months ago, sort of back into this zone when Bitcoin was also going sideways, most of the altcoins were still heading down. Most altcoins bottomed around August, September, October. They started to charge from that point. Whereas Bitcoin, well, we know it had its bottom back in November. Now, what I'm talking about there is the altcoin against its Bitcoin value. So you could have remained safe in the markets from November 2022, getting into Bitcoin, seeing the 100% return from that point, and then looking to rotate if you got the exact timing. I hope you did. If you did, congratulations to you guys. And the exact timing was going from Bitcoin in November 2022 to altcoins in September 2023. So roughly 10-month period, 10-month hold for Bitcoin. Get rid of all of that Bitcoin into strong altcoins and hope that you've picked the strong altcoins, because from that point, there was still no confirmation that they were going to be strong, as we'll look at on the charts in a moment. And then from there, try and hold on for the ride. And the ride's been roughly 5 months since that bottom. So this typically happens every single cycle. That's what we were looking at earlier to let us know at which stage we were in. As we get into year 3, typically it's all alts, and although, well, Bitcoin in the previous cycle in 2017 had a fantastic year, we do know that things have progressed from there, and there are obviously far more cryptos on the market, so you start to see bigger returns from smaller market cap cryptos, altcoins, and that's where people tend to go and gamble next. So in this period of year 2, where you see the rotation from Bitcoin over into alts, Bitcoin still has a pullback, and when those pullbacks occur, the altcoins also have a pullback. Now, it's typically only short-lived from what we've seen in previous cycles, and I want to focus primarily on last cycle to have a look at that timing around the halving, then after the halving, and then the pullback. Previous cycle also had the same thing. The halving, roughly around June, July of 2016, there was a pullback there, and then basically the markets charged from that point. So the second half of 2016, which was after the halving. So if we are getting pullbacks, they're typically not super deep. Now, I say typically because there have been occasions where we have seen a significant correction, but when we're looking at the overall trend, as the markets charge up, there are a lot of shallower pullbacks, and most are waiting for bigger pullbacks, which is how it fuels the bull market, because they're hoping for the bigger pullback. It doesn't come, they have to buy higher, and that spurs the market on higher and higher until, well, everyone's in, and then you get the bigger correction. In 2017, we did have a pretty significant correction in altcoins around mid-year. At that time, Bitcoin was getting forked. Probably most people don't know what forked is anymore. Essentially, that's when Bitcoin Cash came about and was invented. Bitcoin Cash has gone basically straight down from that point. But from there, altcoins had a very significant correction, and they had a rough sort of 6 months down. Now, in the last cycle, we also saw a very, very significant correction, from May into June, took a bit of time into July, and then everything sort of got real frothy again for the last half of 2021. So that's what we've got to watch out for now, is not getting too greedy with those pullbacks. Like we looked at in yesterday's video, the old saying, markets can remain irrational longer than we can remain solvent. I think that plays a pretty big role in this next stage of the bull market. Now, we also saw that for the S&P 500. You see these really, really shallow moves to the downside, and you've got all of, well, investors trying to jump in on the trend, and you're only getting single-digit pullbacks for the majority of that bull market. Now, as we did in yesterday's video, we went all the way back into 2009 from the start of that previous major bull market. Yes, there was a significant correction from the pandemic, but it was roughly 35%. We had about a 27% in 2022, but most had been waiting for some sort of 50-odd% correction, like you've seen at the end of cycles. End of cycles, looking at the end of the 18.6-year cycle. The good news is we are in a macro bull market, as you know from the 18.6-year cycle. We still have a bit of time to go in this major bull market part of the cycle before you get the 4 to 6 years down for the real estate market and the economy. January, forward returns here, January S&P 500, if it was up in this year here, in an election year, typically, well, 100% of the time so far, going back 70 years of data, we see a 100% rate of a positive return for the S&P 500. So that's good news to Bitcoin and cryptos, because essentially everyone gets crazy and risk on is here. Everyone's going and gambling their hard-earned money on the markets. Main thing to note about all of this is these moves, these corrections could be short-lived. And if you're hearing about people telling us that we should get a 15-20% correction, it is very unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely. If we look back like we did yesterday, just as a quick one here, you had 2018 had a 21%, 2011 had a 22%, and 2015 had about a 15%. So you've got a long time with the markets heading up and not very big corrections. Now, we have seen a big correction last year in 2023, basically 10.5%, and then also 2022 had the 27% top to bottom. Now, when you combine the macro cycle of the markets heading up, the traditional markets, and of course real estate, and well, the ETF headlines, I don't necessarily love to base anything on this, but to review it, we have 900 Bitcoin coming out per day. And then, of course, the ETFs are sucking up 10 times more Bitcoin than the miners can produce. Remember, you're still going to have people wanting to sell their Bitcoin at a profit, or you'll still have funds needing to rebalance their portfolios, which causes selling. And it might seem crazy to us, little plebs that don't have as much money as funds, but they do need to rebalance their portfolio. So they'll need to sell off some of that crypto, even if they don't want to. That's part of their rules to their plans, or basically rules from the government that they have to sell off to rebalance their portfolios, just simply put. So it could keep going up. It doesn't mean just because they're selling, they think the market is going to collapse. As I said, the rebalancing needs to occur. Now, when we do get some rebalancing, maybe we see the markets correct, which can cause the fear and greed to flip the other way. We've been hitting 79 for a while. We're down to 72 the last few days. Meanwhile, Bitcoin has continued up. So we're starting to get a slight short-term divergence in the excitement of the market compared to the Bitcoin price. Price on BTC is going up, but the greed is not continuing with it. You're not seeing that excitement continue through, and people are sort of just getting a little bit stale with the move. This is early days. Could take a little bit of time, as we have seen in the past, which is what I want to look at next. So these corrections on the market sentiment, so your fear and greed here, or you could use the TIA Crypto Fear and Greed Index. You can use that by going to the free 7-day trial in the video description. So link at the top of the video description there. And there's free indicators on top of the TIA Gann Swing Indicator. So go and check that out right there. What we're looking at here is when the indicator corrects, so the crypto fear and greed, it doesn't necessarily mean the price has to have a significant correction. I've gone through and circled a few of these times here where we've cycled from extreme greed down to 38 is fear. So anything under 46, if you can kind of just see that there, is fear, and roughly around that sort of 47, 54 is neutral. So that's just resetting the market sentiment out there. So for cryptos, Bitcoins, etc. In July and August of 2020, Bitcoin hit the extreme greed. It corrected on price, which caused the correction for the fear and greed index. So that reset market sentiment. It had some time at lower market sentiment as it began to reaccumulate and then started that final charge into the $65,000 peak. Market went straight up. You had greed for a long time with quite a few minor resets here. Price didn't necessarily go down that much, but the sentiment reset. It was just enough to keep it bubbling for that long enough period of time just to peak at 65,000 before it all rolled over and we had to reset the fear and greed index yet again. Came back down, extreme fear, good couple of months here, reset it, and then it worked its way higher again. So that was one particular example that we saw through 2020 where the market did not, Bitcoin price did not have to go that low. In terms of a percentage, 12.5K down to 9,800, basically a 21%, pretty much exactly what Bitcoin has been doing this cycle. 20 to 22% was enough to reset the fear and greed index from extreme greed to fear, which gives the momentum back to the bulls, enough to charge it into a final peak. We saw it again, 2021, you had that September peak, that was Evergrande news where it collapsed from that point, and then we saw the market reset again on the sentiment. Price didn't necessarily have to go that low from a percentage point of view. Again, roughly about 25% move to the downside before it was able to get back into that extreme greed again and hit the new all-time high. So here we find ourselves again at extreme greed. We could see it correct 20, 21%. If we look at from where the high is, 20% basically only takes us back into the zone of the previous price range for the ETF. So it takes us back into the sort of low $40,000, and that could then reset the fear and greed index, which resets the market sentiment, gives us enough driving power to get back to those highs. And now seems to be, as we've talked about, this stage of the year where you want to be getting into altcoins, maybe shifting out of some of that Bitcoin into the altcoins because they're getting better returns, but only for a brief period of time. That brief period, to me, could be roughly sort of 12 months, maybe 18 months. Obviously, we'll continue to follow up with that on the channel as the markets progress. Now, what you don't want to do is be like these crazy Twitter accounts, 400,000 followers, absolute garbage. Keep 12 grand aside. This was in October at that bottom, because in 3 months, you might be able to buy a whole Bitcoin for 12 grand. Absolute morons. Super B, so Super Brothers, Super Mario Brothers looks like 12 grand can buy you a quarter of a Bitcoin in 3 months. Spot on. There it was, the tweet. In 3 months later, 12 grand would only buy you a quarter of a Bitcoin because it was at 48 grand. Again, just be careful with who you follow out there. If you want to unfollow everything and do your own thing, I'd highly suggest that too. So to Bitcoin, and somewhere around that title, I was looking at prices that Bitcoin won't hit. We did a bit of this series early in 2023 because essentially it worked out relatively well, where we're looking at prices that Bitcoin won't hit again. Now, I don't think there was one price that we got wrong. I hate using that. 25 grand was very, very close. You can see that it touched 24,920. So spare me 80 bucks. A lot of the calls there were around 25, Bitcoin never hitting 25 grand again if it went above that previous top there at roughly 31, 32,000. Now that we're at 52,000, I'm pretty happy to say that Bitcoin's never going to go under $30,000 again for at least this cycle, and then see what happens next cycle depending on how high we go for BTC. But at least for this cycle, it doesn't seem like Bitcoin will get back under 30 or 32. I know there are still some people looking for that, but I think waiting on that would just be that greed side to try and get that lower price when the markets are telling us that they are very strong and those pullbacks are probably going to be shallow. So I spent a good part of this video talking about how shallow some of these pullbacks can be in these bull markets. Now, they could go a lot further. I know that. I don't have a 100% guarantee on the black side of the chart, but I just want to throw the probabilities in my favor and say, well, it's probably unlikely it'll go under 32K. And if I wanted to get even that bit closer, stuff that I hold a little bit lighter here is I'd say it's probably not going to go under the mid 30s again. Looking at our 50% level from the low at 25K to where we currently are, maybe this goes a bit higher. Now the midpoint's roughly around 39,000. You've got quite a few lows and closing prices at about 37. So roughly speaking, a nice round number, a bit lower than that for safety. I don't think Bitcoin's going to go under 35 grand again this cycle. You're probably going to have to see something that it hasn't done yet, and that would be a correction more than 30%. It's not impossible, and it could happen. So I'm wanting just to keep the $32,000. We're not going to see Bitcoin go under $32,000 this cycle. If it did something that it hasn't done yet, then maybe we do see that mid-30s pullback. But like I've said, for bull markets, it seems like we're getting that shallower pullback, and not to get too greedy on these pullbacks. Even if it did do that, are you really prepared to wait and hope and use those tiny probabilities that it does get to that point? If you saw 38K again, wouldn't you just want to scoop up at 38K instead of hoping and waiting for like a 34 or a 35K? It's really nothing in the grand scheme of things if we still think Bitcoin has got a lot longer to go in this bull market. And speaking of how much further we have to go in this bull market, let's have a look at the altcoins. As I said at the beginning of the video, we are a month or two away from the halving now, sort of 6 weeks away. And in the previous cycles, from that point, they've gone straight up. I think most of us know that by now, and it seems like they're doing that at this point in time. We're not getting those big pullbacks on altcoins unless you're looking at the Bitcoin chart. So hopefully you've got some of those profits from BTC and you're throwing them into some of those altcoins which are pulling back. But for the altcoins here, total market cap excluding Bitcoin and ETH, it broke higher, and it's got half a month to go now, but it's pretty much pulling away from where we had that correction in January. Now it's been up for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 6th straight month now for the altcoin market cap to be up. Yes, of course, eventually we do have some sort of corrections, but when we're looking at the monthly market cap, the monthly chart here, the corrections in the past, they have not broken down on the swing chart. You've had the lows holding out, similar to what we just saw last month, and then needing 1, 2, 3, maybe 2 or 3 months to reaccumulate after such a strong move before it then pumps again. So if we are in the midst of something similar to what's happened in previous cycles after this period, then again, that reinforces to me that hoping and waiting for bigger pullbacks is unlikely. There probably will come at least one in the cycle, but it doesn't seem like now is that timing. I'm happy to be wrong on that one because, of course, we'd all love to be scooping up stuff lower. But in terms of where we currently sit, it seems like these are going to be those shallow pullbacks that then bring us into that FOMO stage where everyone's trying to buy higher and higher for the altcoins. ETH is also in a very similar trajectory. We're heading up into the 50% level. It looks like we're a few bucks away from that right now. And these pullbacks on Ethereum, crazily enough, have only been about 28%. We take it from the first bounce that it had out of its low, that was 47%. So that was from the low in June, and it bottomed much, much sooner than Bitcoin. You had a June low for ETH and a November low for Bitcoin. So ETH has had a better run at that point in terms of the gains. They're roughly on track now when we look at the ETH BTC chart, because you can see back from that June low, that's where ETH bottomed, and it's basically at the same level as it was back in June, which means it has had the same gains as BTC through that period. Now, where do we go next? Potentially we're at that low now for Ethereum. Maybe last month was the low. I've got 25 months from the peak to the bottom. The previous cycle had 27 months from the peak to the bottom. We were looking for a breakdown of these previous lows. It has had a break, but then closed above, which potentially shows the strength of Ethereum in this stage or coming up into this next stage of the bull market. So potentially this is a double bottom. If it is, I want to see Ethereum break above 6.5 million Satoshis over the coming months as we lead into that halving, which will then potentially show extra strength to Ethereum's USD price. So is now the time to be selling some of that BTC into ETHs. This is riskier because it's still at the low and the confirmation isn't there. If you wanted to wait, well, you obviously pay a higher price. But if you wanted to do that earlier, now could be a relatively safer time to be getting in and flipping those Bitcoins to ETH to then get that higher return in this stage of the cycle. And of course, if you don't care about ETH and you want the altcoins, then let's get degenerate. Let's have a look at some of the altcoins over here. TIA, I brought it up. It's the investor accelerator, but it's not our coin. Celestia, we can see that it's breaking down on the Bitcoin chart. So you want to find altcoins that are strong. They've been doing relatively well throughout this period of the cycle. Big moves to the upside. See here that it has had pretty significant gains from the low to the high against BTC value, 670%. Really, really good gains there. Something similar to what Solana did in the first stage of its cycle back in 2020. It did about 660% against its BTC value, going from 50 cents to $5, which of course is about a 10x. But now we're seeing the pullback, and these pullbacks can last a couple of months. So that's something that we looked at as well, where we had that sort of final couple of months that the altcoins pull back before Bitcoin goes into a new all-time high, which potentially happens later this year. And then you get the big blast off. There is potential time here for some of these alts if you're chipping away at them, getting rid of your Bitcoin, putting them into these other altcoins. They potentially, or probably in the case of this, because the chart is down, you'll see losses against the BTC value, but it could be that sort of accumulation period. It does take some time, and then you have to wait, and then you see them pump from there. So it's hit the 50%, broke back under it, and now heading towards the next levels of support and resistance. You can see our 50% level here at, 26,000 Satoshis. Injective, take this off log. You can see that it's pumped up in that December month when everyone was getting their feelings in their jellies. The big one up, and now it's taken 2 months to come back down against its BTC value. Every time you see something ridiculous, some crazy bar like that, it needs some time to recover and digest such crazy moves. And so these last couple of months have basically been down for Injective against its BTC value. Look towards that 50% level, look towards those previous highs and swing bottoms as potential entry. There you could have a nice sweet gain. But if you don't want to wait for it to get that low, just in case it doesn't fall that low, well then I like to start buying just a little bit above that 50% level. And the last one here, this is what you don't want to see. If your altcoins are looking like this, I know I bring up XRP, but it is a clear example on the chart where they just keeps going down. Now it's getting very close to the price when it got slapped with that lawsuit by the SEC. And so if the insiders aren't finding value in this thing at prices that it got to when it got slapped with a lawsuit, and now it's finished its lawsuit. Look at that. That's the pump that said the lawsuit's over. Something is not right. Something is definitely not right in the camp of XRP, and they're probably trying to flog off a lot of XRP to help keep the facade going for a little bit longer. Now, you probably don't want to know about ones that aren't working out, but just keep an eye on that for your own altcoins. If they're going down the shitter, maybe don't go down with them. VET has had a big pump up this last day. Typically when you see this, it's pretty much off news. It could go a lot further, but it really has not done anything since June 2023. Sure, it had a little pump up here, back down. It's had a pump now in some news. That's typically not what you want in a bull market. You want to see these things rising and rising and rising, so you're getting bigger and bigger gains. Don't fall for this old crap. Sure, it has some news pumps. If you want the news pump to trade, go for that. So let's have a look at something else that might be working a little better. And Michael's talked about this on his channel. You can check his channel out. There's a link in the video description where he trades altcoins in shorter timeframes if that is your cup of tea. But ICP, also similar, it hasn't done much since the June bottom, sideways, but it's had a pump up now. So you can start to trade these things if you're looking for something to get on board with that is in a trend. Be careful that they don't start to fall back below previous levels, because that essentially implies that there is weakness forming in these markets, and you basically want to get your money out of these things rather than hold on and hope. So I think it's time to kiss $32,000 BTC goodbye, and potentially anything under sort of $35,000 on Bitcoin. We've also looked at the shallow pullbacks at certain stages of the market and what that means for your Bitcoin, for your switching to ETH or switching to altcoins as well, how to assess that on the altcoin BTC chart so that you are getting into stronger projects and not getting swept up in hopes and dreams of old cryptocurrencies that basically only pump on a good news day and then fail after that point. And of course, the macro cycle at large, where we're still in a big bull market, probably for a considerable amount of time to get us through these next stages of the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency bull market. Like and subscribe. Thanks again for your time and support on the channel. Let's crush 400,000 before the end of the year. Share this content with at least one person today to continue on this journey. See you at the next one. Till then, take care and peace out.